Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another installment of Flex University. My name is Josh Graham. I am the sales manager here for our group sales consultants. Today we're going to be discussing small group insurance, really how to get you going here for next year, things to be aware of, questions to ask, things that I am aware of that are going to be coming down the pipe. Still a lot to come, a lot of unknowns, but this is definitely the time for all of us to educate ourselves and just get back in the groove of looking at group insurance as an option for our clients. Just a quick overview about Flex. We have been in the business since 1988, located in Rosemont, Illinois. We have roughly 75 employees with two primary focuses within our business structure, our general agency, which we're here speaking about today, as well as our consumer-driven accounts and compliance services through our third-party administration. As a general agent, we represent the top carriers here in the Chicago market as well as nationally. For medical insurance, we represent Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Illinois and Texas, Aetna, and United Healthcare. We also have a number of different ancillary contracts available, such as Dearborn National, Principal, The Standard, Delta Dental of Illinois. We have exclusive sheet rates with VSP, and our newest contract that we added was MetLife. Some potential changes coming here towards the end of the year, which we'll be excited to announce to all of you as well. Speaking about our TPA services, our consumer-driven accounts and compliance, we have a new technology that was recently launched for our FSAHRA and HSA services that are going to bring some significant increases to our functionality and the mobile access to these services to make life easier for members in a digital age. Our FSAs, HRAs, and HSAs are available today. Quoting for those is as simple as sending an email to our quoting department, quotes a flexible benefit. We just need the name of the group, the total eligible count, and where that group is located. We are an approved vendor for Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Illinois, Texas, Oklahoma, Montana, and New Mexico. You'll actually find this on the BPS, if you're familiar with that, as an integrated solution to offer HSA plans to your employer clients. If you have questions on that, please reach out to one of your sales representatives. Today's agenda, we're going to be going through, first of all, some of the main things that I think are important that we recap before we really start talking about quoting and what consists of a group, which is really the market determination. I think most of us are pretty aware of this, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it today, but I do want to make sure that we have a baseline for our education to make sure that we're talking to clients appropriately. We're going to discuss how to get started in group, really from a prospecting perspective, questions to ask at an information meeting, and really what's going to be needed to quote. We're going to look at our actual quoting process, turnaround times, expectations. Obviously, those can flux in our high peak times, but really just focusing on our general turnaround times from a quoting perspective. A question I get and our sales reps get on a daily basis, hey, I have a group, can I write it? And a lot of those questions are now coming into play in regards to, the individual market and the challenges there, the movement of that individual market into the group market if available. So a lot of husband and wife questions are coming up. So we'll kind of look at that on a high level. I'm actually going to be presenting in the middle of September and going into more detail with what is a group, because that literally could be an hour presentation on its own. And then lastly, we'll look at group submissions, best practices, technologies available to you, and different ways that you can make your life easier when it comes to submitting a new case. So first off, as I mentioned, market determination, very important that we understand the differences in how markets are determined. Many of us do get opportunities outside of the state of Illinois. It's important to know that every state determines their markets differently. So depending upon the carrier and where they're going to cite us, that particular group, it's important to have a baseline of knowledge of the different ways in which market determination is evaluated. There are really three different methods of doing this. The most common around the Midwest area here is the average total number of employees. Basically counting up all of your full-time, part-time, seasonal, temporary workers, anyone that's on payroll for the most part is going to be included within this calculation. People that would be excluded typically would be partners of a business, owners or spouses of an owner. They are going to be excluded from that AT&E count. This is looked at on a previous calendar year basis. So for any cases that we're writing for a 2016 effective date, they would be taking the average for all of 2015 to determine what this particular count is. In addition, another option for some states, and this is really what we had been accustomed to prior to the Affordable Care Act, was the full-time eligible count. So literally anyone that you deem as eligible for the benefits would determine whether or not you are above or below the small group or large group mark. The other option in some states, which to me is ludicrous, but it is out there, they will look at full-time equivalents. As many of you are aware, full-time equivalence is the definition used to determine whether or not a group above 50 is an applicable large employer and therefore subject to penalties and mandates. FTE is a fairly cumbersome calculation where you lump all your full-time people into one category, you look at the remaining part-time individuals, and you will equate them into a full-time employee based upon their hours worked within a particular time set, typically on a monthly basis. And you've got to take that average over the previous year, just like our other definitions. And that is what would then determine whether or not you are a small employer or a large employer. So a lot of work there. Just to kind of give you an idea of the different states, as I mentioned here in the Midwest, most of the states now for 2016 have been using the definition of average total number of employees. You can see that the full-time equivalents are more popular on West Coast and East Coast, and then your eligibles you'll see in gray. So different methodologies depending on the state. You know, things that I would keep in mind if I were you, each carrier will determine their situs state differently. Some base it strictly on where the group is headquartered. Some will base it based upon a majority of employees residing in a particular state. So make sure you talk to your sales reps to understand where the particular carrier is going to situs the group, and then identify how that particular state is going to handle the market determination. So, you know, one of the questions I get, you know, why is this important? You know, number one, if you're a small group, you're dealing with no underwriting. As soon as you bump into the 51 plus market, you now have to go through underwriting. And by the way, all of the applications are different. You have to collect medical. The plans and rates are established differently. There are sex and age factors taken into consideration, SIC code. It is a completely different ballgame. And I can tell you from personal experience, we have dealt with clients that have assured us that this is a small group, don't worry, it's age rated. And then as soon as we provide a quarterly wage and tax report, it turns out that they didn't tell us that there was a population of union employees that were not eligible for benefits. You know, not sharing that information immediately took this into the 51 plus market, and we had to go back to the drawing board and resell the entire group. That is just a simple example of those union people. They may not be eligible for benefits, but they are technically an employee of the company. They were a W-2 paid employee and will go into those calculations. So, you know, it's really important that we do evaluate on the front end and make sure that we're asking the right questions when we're sitting across the table from those employer clients. And in addition to that, obviously the applications that are collected are different too. You know, employer applications are different, employee apps are potentially different. All of that is very important to make sure that we identify the correct market segment. So jumping ahead, really, you know, how to get started in group. For most of us, it's going to be relationship building, getting to the prospect, making cold calls. But really getting started in group is knowing how to ask the right questions. And first of all, before you even get in the door to ask the questions, you need to identify your audience. It's important to identify who you're selling to, and really we've found that many brokers try to create a niche for themselves focusing on a particular industry, utilizing a positive sales experience for a client and asking for that referral within their industry. They know who their competitors are. Many industries are friendly competitors and will basically recommend you in those circumstances. So it really helps target your focus. You know, when we talk about picking an audience, and I've asked this to many brokers, I said, you know, what's your focus? And they say small group. And I'm like, well, what kinds of small groups? They're like, well, anything under 50. Well, really the identifying factor is, you know, what type of industry are you going to go after? Because that really focuses your efforts. You know, identifying associations that may be involved with that particular group are important. You know, leveraging any vendors associated with a particular group and using them as referral sources. So really just trying to hone in your focus within a particular industry, business. That's very important to, you know, how well you are able to generate referrals and obviously create new business opportunities for yourself. Once you get to the table, though, it's important that we're asking the right questions. I already, you know, hit on market determination and why that's important. Those types of questions are obviously going to be asked. But identify, you know, really what carrier they're with, certain plan designs. Try to get the current renewal rates. I know that some clients are hesitant to provide that because they think if we have it, you know, that we're just going to cherry pick off of the rate, and you know, that's not really the case anymore. However, sometimes we've had some difficult individuals to work with that we're not going to get that information. Definitely helps us. Always ask for it, whether you get it or not. Sometimes we have to have it, sometimes we don't, depending upon where we're at in the sale. You know, underwriting sometimes requires that I have that information. But as far as collecting the initial information to quote a group, it helps to have it. We don't necessarily have to have it. Don't forget to ask about ancillary. I find this to be one of the most common practices that is overlooked by many brokers. They get comfortable with the medical sale. Sometimes the ancillary is not as comfortable to them, and therefore they decide not to ask about it. Whether that be disability, whether that be, you know, dental, which I think is pretty basic. You know, disability to me is one of the most important things to ask about, because if you cannot provide for your family or have a livelihood based on being disabled, you're not going to be able to pay for your dental insurance or your medical insurance, et cetera. So, you know, it's important that that you talk about these things. I would reference you to Gil Casea in our office, who is a dedicated outside ancillary sales consultant for flexible benefit that represents all of our carrier contracts, very well versed in those areas and can provide a lot of value to you when it comes to cross-selling your existing book, and then obviously making sure that for new business we're asking for those quotes for the ancillary. In order to collect the correct census, I would tell you that things are changing from a group market perspective as far as the data that needs to be collected in order to get a base quote. For most of our carriers, effective October 1st, a member-level census is going to be required for small group. As many of you are aware, that's been normal for the Affordable Care Act cases, or your age-rated groups, but that's actually coming up market. So for your 51-plus AT&E cases, Aetna, Blue Cross, United, they're all going to require the same type of census that you would have collected in the small group market, which means I need gender, I need date of birth for all members, I need the tier of coverage. Really, the member-based census is the new requirement coming out for October 1st. Some carriers are already requiring it for September 1st effective dates, but as you start to compile these census moving through the end of the year, make sure that you collect information on a member-level basis. In addition to that, they're going to ask for home zip codes for each employee. And why that's important, and one of the trends that's happening from an underwriting perspective, is now carriers are going to be utilizing member-based underwriting. Some of you may or may not be familiar with that process. Aetna's been doing it for a little over 2 years now. You know, Blue Cross and United are going to be adopting that. United for 9/1, Blue Cross can do it now for 10/1 effective dates. business as usual for them for 9-1, but basically the member-based underwriting is a way for the carriers to identify medical conditions based on prescription utilizations. So they will pass the information within the census, which includes, as we said, date of birth, gender, first name, and last name of each one of the employees and dependents. I think I forgot to mention that to you. It's probably one of the bigger challenges, really. But basically, they pass all this information, including the home zip code, through a third party that provides a factor or rate up to the insurance company. The insurance company doesn't know what the issues were or who it was for, but they literally receive a factor that they then apply to a rate. And then that rate is typically sellable depending upon the carrier that we're working with. So they take that into consideration on the front end for those 51-plus quotes. It's going to be an additional step for all of us. While it's annoying and time-consuming on the front end, it actually should save quite a bit of time on the back end of the particular quoting process and installation process. If you are going to be quoting any types of salaries or any type of disability insurance or life insurance that's going to be tied to a salary, you will need to collect that salary information. Disability obviously would be required to have both salary and occupations. The more information you can get on the occupations, the better. If we just hear that someone's a warehouse worker, it's going to be rated as such. But if we learn that, it's not just warehouse, they have some warehouse that are behind a desk, some that are, running forklifts, all of that comes into play in our rates with the carriers. So the more information you can get on occupations, the better the particular outcome will be for that quote. So this is kind of a highlight as to, what types of things you need to talk about. We do have a census template available for 51 plus and for small group, and as well as ancillary, a new one for ancillary coming out here very soon. But those are available. You can reach out to your sales rep. We can provide those to you. They are on our website at flexiblebenefit.com as well. So as I mentioned, when we talk about market determination, here are the other factors that you're going to want to ask when going in to get the census, the AT&E count, as I mentioned. We'll want to know how many full-time eligible there are, because sometimes our census is only going to include those that are actually enrolled in benefits. Many carriers will use that eligible count to ballpark participation and take that into consideration on the front end of the quote. So if we originally submit a case, for example, for quote, and we say that there's 50 enrolled and there's 50 eligible and the AT&E 70, and we find out later that the actual eligible count was 70 instead of 50, all of a sudden our rates will change dramatically because our participation is no longer 100%. Still fairly good participation, but it's important to note that those rates will change based on the information that is provided on the front end for the quote request. Employer contribution plays a role with some of our carriers as well. The more you can, obviously get the employer to contribute within a health plan, the less of an adverse selection issue that we run into. So we're going to get more of the good risk within a particular group, and therefore a better rate associated with that group. So it's important that we identify that contribution percentage as well. Also, ask questions about the employer client's aptitude for electronic enrollment platforms. We have some things that we can offer here within our organization. Blue Cross has their Blue Directions platform for small groups that's important to know about, because that can streamline a lot of your enrollment process and do a lot of things online, collect employee elections through in a portal that can integrate additional carriers as well. So, knowing whether or not an employer client would look into that is important. Sometimes they don't get asked that question, and just bringing it up can draw light on the fact that, potentially the other broker that's in there doing business is really not doing them justice or providing a lot of these new value-added services that are available in the market. Identifying what's worked for them in the past, any issues that they've had or challenges, just getting that in the front of your mind as you go through that enrollment and quoting process. Areas that you can identify with, reiterate that yes, we're going to be doing certain things differently. We're going to be able to support, many of the issues that you had in the past. Just a normal sales tactic as you go through this process. Anything that you want to avoid, if a client says I'm absolutely not going to go with a particular carrier, Me personally, I'd still be quoting that carrier, so we could say that we quoted it and showed it, but obviously you'll know that that's not going to be something that you're going to want to, recommend when it comes to a finalist presentation. Don't be afraid to value sell with a carrier. Sometimes we get quotes back and the rates are a little bit higher, but we know that that might be a better carrier than another from a choice perspective, and while it may cost a little bit more, that carrier could bring the value necessary to warrant that additional premium. So I wouldn't be opposed to value selling that, especially if someone had a bad experience with a particular carrier in the past. All of these carriers are on their toes, they're changing, they're nimble, they're making adjustments and growing every day. So it's important to look at them and reevaluate those carriers if you have not had an opportunity to work with them in the past, excuse me. Timelines for follow-up meetings are important. Yes, you sat down, you got all the information you need, but if you're not setting another appointment there at the table for when you're going to come back and meet with them and discuss your findings, I think that you've missed out already on a potential sales opportunity. So set those expectations ahead of time. Sometimes that's difficult. As we know, we don't know exactly when we're going to get quotes back, but that's why we want to identify in our quoting, when can we expect these quotes to come back from the carriers so that I can set my appointment and get out there timely and keep the ball rolling. Number one, small group quotes. If we can quote them in-house, generally we're flipping those in about 2 to 3 days. That would be for Blue Cross, for Aetna, for United, any of our ancillary carriers. Some of them we have quoting platforms with under 10 lives, so it'll vary. If we can quote it in-house, our typical turnaround time is going to be about 2 to 3 business days. Some small group quotes in the 51-plus market do require us to quote them externally, meaning they have to be sent out to quote. Some allow us to quote it internally. We have access to those. So basically, if we're able to quote in-house, then we'll turn it around in the same time frame as small group. If we're not able to and we have to send it out, that can be anywhere from 5 to 7 business days. So when we talk about collecting the right information on the front, and especially for the cases that do need to be sent out to the carriers, having all of that data and the correct information up front can ensure that we hit these timelines. Obviously, if there's any back and forth, you didn't provide the AT&E count, or I don't know how much they're contributing, those types of issues can slow down the quoting process. So having a complete, thorough RFP is definitely going to make this a better process. Ancillary quotes 2+, once again, some carriers we have the ability to quote in-house. The majority of our call it our true ancillary carriers, all they do are ancillary. That's generally going to take about 5 to 10 business days. Some take a lot longer, some are very quick. It just varies by carrier. But once again, when we're talking about ancillary quotes, collect the benefit information. What do they have now? What are they looking for? If we get a quote request and it just says quote dental, we're going to quote a dental policy for you, but it's probably not going to be exactly what they're looking for. And if you don't emphasize what benefits you're looking for when it comes to a quote process, the carriers themselves may quote all different benefits. So the ancillary template that we have for our census will identify which products we want to have quoted, and within that product, what are the high-level benefits? Dental, for example, what is the annual maximum? Are we looking for an active or passive plan? Do you want to include orthodontia? Just high-level so we can get very close across the board with all the dental quotes that go out to the carriers. Obviously, that's going to be the value we bring to you as a broker here within our organization, is the ability to go to market with all the different ancillary carriers and provide an apples-to-apples representation of what the rates are. So that gives you an idea of what we need for ancillary quotes. The TPA quotes, as I mentioned, for our consumer-driven plans or any of our compliance-related services, those are quick. We can turn those around in 2 to 3 days. There's not a lot of information that you provide to us. We're going to give you our benchmark rates. If we need to get competitive, if you have competitor data, send it to us. I'm willing to go talk to some people here, knock some heads, and beat them up for some better rates for you. So just let us know what's out there and what we're competing against, and I will try to get as competitive as possible. For quote requests, those can be sent directly to our quoting department. I do recommend that you carbon copy your sales rep so they know that it goes in. We can also eyeball it and make sure that it has the information necessary. Obviously, we've kind of hammered home what's needed to quote, but it's important that we know that it goes in. So those quotes can be sent to quotes, which is plural, at flexiblebenefit.com. We are going to be creating a new quote inbox, just as a heads up to you, for ancillary proposals. What happens with our queues as we go throughout the year is that sometimes we don't have enough time to identify a quote as being ancillary to get it out the door fast enough. So we're actually creating a new email address for an ancillary-only quote. I am not 100% sure on that email address at this point, so I haven't put that in there. But as soon as we do know, we're going to get the new contact sheets out to the brokerage community and obviously market that out to you so you know where to send those. If I was to take a guess, I believe it's going to be ancillary quotes at flexiblebenefit.com. Make sure that when you send that quote off, we have the census. Some brokers are still sending their census in a PDF format. It does take more time to run those proposals, so please, please, please keep them in an Excel document. Don't PDF the Excel document, just keep it in an editable format for Excel so that we can turn the quotes around fastest for you. It's actually required for some of our ancillary carriers to be in Excel. So if it's not, we have to come back to you and ask you to do that anyway. So it's just going to behoove you to work out of Excel when sending in these quote requests. Provide the AT&E counts, full-time eligible counts, employer contributions as we discussed. And as I mentioned, reach out to your sales rep. We could send you those templates, or we have them available at flexiblebenefit.com. Can I write this group? Very common question, as I mentioned, as we started, becoming more and more common. Obviously, as many of you know, the individual market got shaken up very dramatically at the beginning of 2016. I don't anticipate anything changing from that respect for 2017. We're going to have more shakeup. Many of you have seen some of the proposed rate increases within the state of Illinois and nationally. Obviously, double digits and some challenges that we're going to have if you do have a large individual market, or I should say a large individual book of business. And what we've found is that there's a huge opportunity for group sales. Many of these individuals that have policies outside of their employer have the ability to talk to their employer to start up a group plan. And we're going to talk about that a little bit today. But first of all, let's talk about, really what is a group? Let's define a group. And before I even start, I've got to kind of, preface that every carrier is a little bit different. Underwriting practices are subject to change, but I think that what I'm going to discuss today is really going to give you a baseline understanding of what is a group. So, as I mentioned, the interpretations for group vary by carrier, but generally speaking, to be a group, you do have to have 2 employees. Depending on the carrier, both of those employees don't necessarily need to be full-time, but when we run into situations where someone's asking me, what is a group or will this qualify as a group, most of the time I'm getting questions in regards to a husband and wife business. Historically, if the wife or husband, just call it spouse of the owner, was on payroll, we could write a 2-life group like that. And the laws have changed with the Affordable Care Act. The biggest change was that we're no longer using a state definition for ERISA. We're actually using a federal definition, which has changed the ability to write those husband and wife cases. The only carrier right now that's really going to entertain a potential husband and wife case is Blue Cross, but there are some very strict guidelines around it that I would reference one of your sales representatives to kind of walk you through that. They have to be what's called a true partnership. So there has to be a share and ownership of the corporation, a partnership, and there needs to be specific documentation filed that would identify that particular corporate structure as a partnership. Just sharing an ownership is not going to get it done. So most of those I shy away from, but in the right circumstance we can write it, but I would once again reference you to your sales representative. When speaking generally, writing a one life group, you know that our market is technically defined for small group as 1 to 50 for all the insurance companies. But when writing a one life group, your safest bet is to have one W-2 employee enrolled in benefits that is not an owner nor a spouse of an owner, and all the carriers will take that. The challenge we find, as I mentioned, is that typically your main full-time person is an owner. And where we run into issues is that technically an owner or a spouse of an owner is not considered an employee. When we look at writing a group, I mentioned that your AT&E count, full-time eligible, all of those equations that we talked about to determine your market segment, they're based on the previous calendar year. The definition of a group is also based on the previous calendar year. So in business days in the previous year, did you employ at least one employee? As I mentioned, spouse, an owner, they're not considered employees. Therefore, you would not qualify as a group if it was just the owner and the spouse of an owner. As soon as we have another W-2 employee enrolled that's not a spouse or the owner, then we're good to go. Many people ask me, well, what if we have a child that's enrolled, 18 years of age or older, they're going to enroll in coverage, they've been working full time, blah, 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 that's fine. A child is okay, we can get away with that. So strictly husband and wife, that's where we run into issues. As long as you have a full-time eligible employee that enrolls in coverage, that they're a W-2 employee, we can write the one life group. So it's a little bit of a challenge, but I think you're going to find a lot of your individual clients that have businesses and could potentially qualify based on some of this. One of our carriers will allow an owner to enroll in a policy as long as they have another full-time or part-time employee on payroll, meaning I need to be able to provide a quarterly wage and tax report that shows a full-time or part-time person that's not the owner or the spouse. The reason I stress the part-time piece is because that individual does not need to be benefit eligible in order for the owner to enroll. Now, contact your sales rep, talk through this a little bit more because there are some parameters around it, but basically, as long as I have another part-time employee, I am going to be classified as a group for Blue Cross in particular. Aetna and United, they're literally going to want a W-2 person that's not the owner or spouse enrolled. So there are some interesting, and I shouldn't say interesting, but there's some areas that we can try to get groups up and running, try to save some commissions when it comes to the loss of what's out there potentially on the individual market. Many people are trying to access the large networks. We don't see those going away for group. So that's going to be one of the areas that you'll be able to access that. So that would be my little pitch when it comes to trying to save your individual clients potentially and get them onto the large networks. Questions I would ask when looking at how do I define a group, number one, can I furnish a quarterly wage and tax report? Sometimes if you're just dealing with partners in a business, they're only going to have K-1s. Doesn't mean we can't write the partners in the business, we just have to provide additional documentation. Some examples of documentation: if you don't have a quarterly, you're most likely either a new business, you've not been in business for a quarter to be able to file your quarterly wage and tax report, or you don't have any W-2 employees. Assuming you're a new business and you don't have a wage and tax, the information that you need to provide it's fairly simple. Most businesses should have this. If you're an S-Corp or C-Corp, you'd have articles of incorporation. If you were an LLC, you'd have articles of organization. There is a letter that is sent from the Secretary of State, known here in Illinois as the Jesse White letter. This is a letter that identifies a business in good standing to do business here in the state of Illinois. That is required to show that you have filed your tax ID with the state of Illinois and that you are also domiciled as a local business in the state of Illinois. There is a website that you can find on the Secretary of State's that the carriers will typically use to make sure that you are headquartered here in Illinois. I can send that link to you if you need it. Just send me a note. and I can show that to you. But for the most part, the groups that we're going to deal with here locally, especially in the small group market space, they're going to be domiciled here in Illinois, and you should receive a letter when setting that up. If they can't find the letter, it can be purchased again online and have it sent to them, but it will be required for some of our carriers. The SS4 form, which is an IRS form, federal IRS form that basically is going to identify you've filed for your tax ID. That proves that you're a legitimate business as well. Most carriers will look for at least 2 weeks worth of payroll to show that you're paying employees, that they are earning a full-time wage. So that's important to have that. And some carriers will also ask for a letter directly from the business stating, dear carrier, here is a list of all of my full-time employees working 30 hours or more, 40 hours or more, whatever your eligibility hours are at, and then you list out the employees by name. Because ultimately that's what they're reconciling on a quarterly wage and tax report. They're looking for who's full-time, they're looking for who's paid a wage, and they want to identify, have we offered coverage to each one of those people? That letter on company letterhead will be a piece that is going to be in lieu of the quarterly wage and tax report. That will be what they will use to determine participation requirements and also to make sure that you have offered coverage to all of your full-time eligible employees. Now, I find it hard to believe, but this is a little known secret that many of us forget because it only comes around within a 1-month period. But it is an opportunity for growth within your agency. This is the special enrollment period between November 15th and December 15th of every year prior to January 1st effective dates, in which the carriers are required by law, based on how the Affordable Care Act was written, to waive both participation requirements and contribution requirements. And I stress this because this is your opportunity to talk to your individual clients that have been begging you to get access to full network products, and talk to them about going in, sitting down with their employer, who most likely does not offer coverage today because that's why they've gone and gotten their own individual policy, and talk to them about this special enrollment period in which that employer could help your individual client gain access to that full network product, better plan options, more carrier options, and do so without having to contribute to the benefits, without having to meet certain participation requirements, and can really just help their employee without any financial obligations. The only commitment they're making is an hour out of their day to get the policy set up for that particular employee. It's going to maintain commissions for you. It's going to give employees access to large networks, and really you're helping those individuals. What I would recommend, if you're going to be looking at this particular strategy, keep an eye out for an email from our office that is going to identify a letter that you can give to an individual client that will be supplemented with a letter that that individual can give to their employer that you can fill in your contact information and use as a marketing piece in order to generate new group sales for 2017. I think this is going to be huge. It's something that I've put together that I think that our brokers can really utilize, especially those that have an individual block. Let's get these guys on groups. Let's protect them, get them a better product. There's no underwriting. And employers not only don't have to pay for it, the employees will be able to pay for their benefits on a pre-tax basis, which means it's 25 to 30% less expensive. In addition to that, the employer is going to save on their payroll taxes, 7.65% of whatever the employees run through that payroll for their benefits. So not only is it going to help the employee, it's going to help the employer because they're going to save tax dollars. So I wanted to make sure that I stress to all of you the importance of this time period, the importance of marketing it now and getting your pipeline set, because that window of time between November 15th and December 15th is going to close very quickly. And if you miss that date, you missed out on the removal of participation and contribution requirements. Talking about small group submissions, best practices, ways for us to make sure that cases go through cleanly and quickly for you. Many of our carriers right now, once we have a clean case submitted to them, are turning around welcome letters in days. We were always used to welcome letters taking, 5 to 7 days. Now we're talking less than 24 hours with some of the carriers. So in order to make sure that we are getting cleaner cases so that we can turn them faster for you as agents, we've obviously created checklists. You've seen those from us in the past. We do keep those updated on our website for new materials and things like that. You can always reach out to your sales rep and they'll send you the most up-to-date materials. Those materials are also available on all the carrier websites, but our checklists are really going to help you identify all the correct documentation that we need on the front end to avoid any issues with the submission. General information required from all the carriers, obviously employer-level applications, they will vary carrier to carrier. Employee applications, most carriers are utilizing their own paper now. They're not utilizing the universal applications any longer. Some of them will actually accept enrollment census, so you can avoid taking applications altogether. The quarterly wage and tax report may or may not be required now, depending on the carrier and the group size. Some carriers over 10 lives enrolled, they don't even need a wage and tax anymore. Some don't even care about waivers. It's becoming easier and easier to write small group business here in the state of Illinois. If you are required to submit a quarterly wage and tax report, make sure that you reconcile it. If someone was terminated, they're on there, mark them as terminated. If they're part-time, not eligible for benefits, mark that on there. If they're full-time eligible, mark them as full-time eligible and make sure that we have an application or a waiver or they're accounted for on an enrollment census. And that way we can avoid any back and forth. So getting that wage and tax up front, twofold. It's going to help you identify who's eligible, but it's also going to help you identify your market segment. Because remember my example in regards to union people? Your union employees will show up on a wage and tax. You'll need to mark a U next to them for union for each one of those people. They will go into your average total number of employee calculation. So having that information up front can also help you make a more seamless integrated process for that installation for your client. Some carriers will require a renewal, some will not. Prior carrier bills are important. One that makes sure that we get the credit for deductible and potentially with the out-of-pocket for the transfer. We potentially will be able to credit individuals for waiting periods on dental plans. That bill does a bunch of different things for us. It also makes sure that we identify everyone that was covered. Once again, another spot check like a quarterly wage and tax report. So many of our carriers are going to require that. So make sure you have that with the submission. Once that case is submitted into our new business team, we have multiple new business specialists that will dig through the group and identify any missing information. Our goal and pledge to our brokers is to have a missing information report back to you within 24 to 48 hours. Obviously, that's dependent upon the volume at the time of year. If we're talking fourth quarter and we're submitting cases for 1/1, it's going to take us a little bit longer to get through that, which is, once again, another reason to submit the cleanest case possible. But we're going to provide back to you one list of missing information. And the goal is that with one list of missing information to you, it's one touch to the client and one list back to us, the cleanest, seamless integration possible for getting these cases installed. Some notes to focus on: when you receive that missing information report from our new business team, always reply back to that email as opposed to starting a new email, because the email as it comes into our team is going to be directed right to the person that was working that case, and it actually gets moved to the top of their queue. So if you send in a new email, it's going to be at the bottom of their queue, and it's not going to be looked at as quickly. Piecemealing missing information slows us down and creates opportunities for us to miss information potentially. So having one concise email back with all the missing information is very important to the turnaround times for your particular group cases. When we do submit the case to the carrier, that means that we have a clean case. We will identify that via email to you, that it was sent to the carrier, and to expect an update from us soon with the information. As I mentioned, welcome letters are turning around right now in about 24 hours for, I would say, most of our carriers once they're submitted. That's in the small group market space. Under 50, 51 plus, obviously, we're most likely dealing with underwriting. That's going to take a little bit more time. But that gives you an idea of kind of the timelines and what to expect when moving forward with a case submission within our organization. So, just to recap, and I'll open it up to questions that you can type in your chat function. Our busiest time of year is literally around the corner. I know it's summer. I know it's scary, but it is right in front of us. And our ability to capitalize on the opportunity out there means that we really need to be putting in our focus to educate ourselves and really build that pipeline, as I mentioned, for the 2017 open enrollment period. Marketing towards those individual clients, I think, is a great way to open up the opportunity for you to sell more groups. You know, imagine you get one individual client and they actually work for an employer that has 10 employees. You just turn that one sales opportunity into 10 sales opportunities. Definitely commissions available in the group markets. Some uncertainties potentially on the individual markets still. I do expect most of our carriers to have a commission paid for the open enrollment period on the individual policies. You know, but we've already heard of some that said, you know, it's not going to be offered. So more to come with that. You know, that's some of the information we don't quite have yet, and we will keep you abreast of any changes in that regard. Make sure your internal new business process is sound. If you have admin individuals within your brokerage, make sure they're up to speed on the forms and everything that's necessary for each carrier for the submission. Our salespeople are here to support you with that effort as well. Refresh yourself with the online resources here at our organization. You know, we house all of the plan designs for small group, medical, and dental on our website. So if you click on producers when you log into flexiblebenefit.com and then click on carrier materials, you have access at your fingertips to all of our carrier products, determining your market segment, group individual, flex TPA. There's brochures, forms, plan designs, all of it's available there. You pick your plan year and you can identify everything online. So it's a great resource that many don't realize that we have available to them. From a servicing perspective, we have a whole resource guide for services. A lot of items available to you that I think that will help you when it's our busiest time of year coming up here very soon. So with that, I'd like to open up the presentation to any questions that you have. Just as a heads up as well, stay informed. We do have some Medicare presentations coming up here August 25th. Get registered now for our ethics training we have locally here in Rosemont. If you need those 3 classroom hours of ethics, we have that available coming up here shortly. You can register that directly online at Flex University. So I'm going to give everyone just a minute here to type in some questions, and I will start answering those. We already have a few that have come in.